Silverstar at Europa Park is often mentioned as being one of the weakest B&M hypers in the world, but is that really the case, or are we just being too harsh on this roller coaster? I have recently visited Europa Park, and let me tell you, I was very surprised when I rode Silverstar. In this review, I'm gonna talk about why this roller coaster is so underrated. Silverstar might just have one of the best second halves of any hyper coaster in the world, and for the purpose of the viewer's attention span, I'm gonna talk about this as fast as possible. First of all, we're gonna talk about the stats of this ride. After that, we're gonna talk about the presentation and theming of Silverstar. After that, I'm gonna make a whole layout analysis, and that includes the forces you feel when you ride Silverstar. And then at the end, I'm gonna give pros and cons about this roller coaster and give it a score from 1 to 10, of course. So now let's get started. Silverstar is a steel hyper coaster made by B&M, also called Bolliger and Mabiat, and this roller coaster opened all the way back in 2002, so this is one of the oldest ones they've made. The chainlift takes the riders up to an incredible 240 feet, and that is 73 meters. The drop is 220 feet, and that is 67 meters, so a bit shorter. The length of this ride is 5,310 feet, and that is 1,620 meters. Silverstar reaches a top speed of 79 miles per hour, and that is 127 kilometers per hour. And the drop angle of the first drop is 68.5 degrees, so it isn't the steepest drop in the world. And Silverstar still stands strong above the skyline at Europa Park. In terms of theming and presentation, there isn't much to this queue line. The roller coaster is themed to the car brand Mercedes, but the queue line is not so impressive. The queue line is very modern and minimalistic, and there's also a few cars to look at. And I think the station for Silverstar is of course themed to a garage, judging by the footage of course. But I still love how the trains look. It looks very minimalistic but still sleek and nice. And not to mention the comfort of these trains. These clamshell restraints are so nice and comfy for your thighs. So now let's move on to the layout analysis. Silverstar slowly takes a right turn, and then it goes up this big lift hill. Silverstar then slowly goes down the first drop, giving floater airtime in the front and a bit of flowjector airtime in the back because of the whip of the train. Silverstar's first drop is a bit special because it drops over the highway. Then Silverstar quickly takes a left turn up into the first airtime hill. This left turn is a bit intense, pulling decent positive G-forces for the riders. Then the first airtime hill gives a decent amount of floater airtime for the front and back of the train. After that, you fly into another airtime hill, but this airtime hill has some trim brakes. Lucky for me, these trim brakes didn't hit, so that gave strong floater airtime for the whole train on this airtime hill. Then Silverstar quickly hits its turnaround section, which simply is an overbank turn. The train takes the overbank turn with a great speed, giving decent positive G-forces for the riders. The train then hits another airtime hill with a trim brake on it, but yet again I couldn't feel the trim brake, so this airtime hill gives strong floater airtime throughout the whole train yet again. Then the train flies up into its block zone, giving decent ejector airtime in the front and a bit of floater airtime in the back. And that concludes the first half of Silverstar. The second half starts with a nice drop, giving decent ejector airtime in the front and strong ejector airtime in the back row. Then the ride goes into a slow-paced 270-degree upright helix. Even though this turn feels quite slow, it still gives a decent amount of positive G-forces. At the crest, the train quickly drops down, giving flowjector airtime throughout the whole train. Then Silverstar flies into a smaller airtime hill, giving decent floater airtime throughout the whole train. Then after that, Silverstar still showcases speed and flexibility as it flies into two quick turns. This final S-bend element is very fast and enjoyable, giving decent lateral forces on the two small turns. And then Silverstar reaches its final brake run. Going into the brake run, you can still feel that Silverstar has a lot of speed. So this concludes the whole layout analysis. Now I'm gonna talk about the overall thoughts on this ride, and that includes pros and cons on Silverstar of course. And then in the end, I'm gonna give a score from 1 to 10. And to be honest with you guys, I don't really know why people say this is one of the bottom tier B&M hypers, but I'm still not saying that this is one of the top tier B&M hypers of course. That isn't really the case. Rides like Mako and Shambhala still pulls greater forces than Silverstar. What makes Silverstar so different compared to the other B&M hypers is that the first drop and first airtime hill isn't really the best elements on this ride. A lot of other roller coaster enthusiasts also say that the second half on Silverstar is way better than the first half, and I can only agree with them, but I won't say way better, only better. The drop and the next two big airtime hills on Silverstar only gives decent floater airtime, and this is where mostly all the other B&M hypers succeed because they have stronger airtime on these hills. The last small airtime hill before the second half on Silverstar matches the forces on the other B&M hypers, but the dip in and out of the block zone still gives ejector airtime, and that's crazy. Not to mention the second half is probably the best half on any B&M hyper in the world. Silverstar showcases positive G's and strong negative G's and speed at the last half, and that is why Silverstar is an underrated B&M hypercoaster. I would call it a decent B&M hypercoaster. So what would I give Silverstar from a 1 to 10? I'm gonna give Silverstar an 8.5 out of 10. Even even though Silverstar isn't the best or the worst B&M hypermodel, it is still a very good ride. You could argue that Silverstar gives an underwhelmingly amount of airtime in the first half, but it still makes up for it with a world-class second half. So if you haven't tried experiencing a B&M hyper yet, you can still try to ride Silverstar. It is not that bad as people say. Not to mention all the B&M hypers in the world are still world-class rides because this model gets sold. It's just so popular. And that concludes my ride review of Silverstar. Did you love it? Did you hate this video? Let me know what you think of this review. And if you really love videos like this, please check out my channel. Maybe give it a like, give it a comment, subscribe here. But that's of course your own choice, man. And at the end of the day, I'm gonna say, boy.